and dying in your beds many years from now, would you be willing to trade all the days from this day to that for one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom?
And welcome to the Anti-Tyranny News Radio broadcast here on UCY.TV. Thank you for joining me this evening. Right before the broadcast, got a call, and there is something I do need to take care of for a minute. And some of you know my grandma was diagnosed with lung cancer, so she just had to be taken to the hospital, so I need to get on the phone and figure out exactly what's going on. But to start off the broadcast, I do have a clip from Stefan Molyneux, and this is something that people have brought up to me for a while, is, you know, how does death penalty play into the non-aggression principle? And Stefan tackles this one, which I'll give you my take on the death penalty and the non-aggression principle. But I'm going to let you listen to this clip while I figure exactly what is going on with my grandma. So, excuse me, but I will be taking a minute off for a second. But here we go, death penalty and the non-aggression principle, Stefan Molyneux.
Penalty fit into the non-aggression principle when those who commit murder or rape violate the NAP. He also said, how should contemporary society handle murderers or rapists without warehousing them? Go ahead, CJ.
All right. Appreciate the question. Why is this important to you? I'm not saying it's not important. I'm just curious why this is like, everyone has their coin to spend on this conversation, and this is your coin to spend. This is what you're buying, and I'm just curious why.
I think it's actually an emotional prejudice, to be honest with you. I think, like, the position that I take is, why keep prisoners alive? I guess it started maybe a couple of months ago when I read an article about Charles Manson getting conjugal visits from his wife and getting a television and getting access to a cell phone, and I thought, why is this man still being kept alive, after 40-some-odd years of, heinous crime? And I guess, and really the example I always use whenever I'm arguing for the death penalty is people who hurt children. And so I think what it really boils down to is an emotional prejudice I have against, child rapists, child murderers, and I think it has to do more with my own abuse, really, than it does to the sanctity of life, I guess, which, after listening to this podcast and the concept of, universalism, I can't say, if all human life is sacred, then all human life is sacred. I can't pick and choose between the two,
Well, yeah, all human life is sacred is not a philosophical proposition.
Okay.
I mean, and it certainly fails the UPB test, like universally preferable behavior. Because if all human life is sacred, then self-defense becomes impossible, which means human life can't be defended, and therefore all human life can't be sacred. Because a murderer will then kill another human being, and the human being can't defend himself. So anyway, it doesn't really... it's not a philosophical statement. That's sort of an emotional or quasi-religious statement. It's like a deepity. Yeah. All human life.
I guess then it means that I guess in my mind that to utilize the death penalty would be to kind of preemptively, it would be self-defense against people who would go out and commit heinous crimes or recommit.
Well, no, sorry. Hang on, because certainly, well, I mean, first of all, Charles Manson, of course, not a child murderer, but Charles Manson is not out committing crimes while he's in jail, right?
Right.
I mean, he may be committing crimes in jail, I don't know, but he's not out committing crimes, right? So, warehousing does prevent more crimes from being committed, right?
Right.
Now, at the moment, of course, warehousing somebody is offensive to the sensibilities of taxpayers in general, particularly those who are for the death penalty, because they're forced to pay for the prisoner's incarceration, right?
Yeah, that was part of the article. It was something like $7 million has gone into his treatment over the past, X amount of years, just from the state. I believe he's in California.
Yeah. Yeah, so you can't really make a case, because obviously, even if we accept that the philosophical viability of the death penalty, which we can get to, it's not a cost-saving measure in the current system. Because obviously, the last thing you'd want to do is to kill someone who later turns out to be innocent. Right. So you have to allow them so many appeals and so many ways to try and get out of it, and ways to try and prove their innocence, and they all claim they're innocent. You have to give them so many appeals that it actually is just cheaper if you don't condemn them to death, but just keep them in prison, right?
Well, what if it was one of those things where you catch a guy on video who, I don't know, would you mind indulging a hypothetical with me, or would you rather not?
No, I get it. So you have a situation wherein somebody is absolutely guilty.
Yeah, like, they're caught on video, gun, and they say, "I'm going to kill you," and then they shoot the guy. Or, whomever.
Yeah, but I mean, we have those kinds of things, and people still get exonerated, right? Like the Central Park 5. I don't know if you followed any of this kind of stuff.
Oh, yeah.
But, Central Park 5, they all confessed. There was a preponderance of evidence. They all confessed. The confessions were caught on tape. Their parents were present. They described things that only they could know. I mean, it's about as solid a conviction, to my admittedly amateur understanding of the law. It's about as solid a conviction scenario as you can imagine, and then they just got pardoned. I mean, no new evidence had come forward, and now they're getting a whole bunch of money from the taxpayers. After what seems to be a pretty open and shut case of, 5 of them raping this white woman into a near coma death unconsciousness, where the doctors did not expect her to make it through the night. The beatings and rapes were that brutal. So yeah, you can come up with a scenario wherein it's about as certain can be. But look, there was another guy who went to the death penalty recently, where there were like 17 witnesses who all say, yep, he was in a parking lot, pulled out a gun, shot the guy. It was a cop, I think, an off-duty cop or something, that was being shot, that was the victim. And the still thing went through 10 years of back and forth or something like that. So you can come up with theoreticals. It doesn't hugely matter, I think, because theoreticals aren't particularly good in creating universals, if that makes any sense.
It does.
I want to build a bridge that doesn't fall down. Well, theoretically, if a giant boulder the size of a city smashes into that, right, it will fall down. It's like, that's true, and I can't build it in a way that it will withstand that. Right? But I'm still not going to pay a lot for insurance.
What is your personal stance on it? I mean, I guess what is your thoughts on it? I mean, would you, if you had to make one claim one way or another about it?
Well, no. See, this is the beautiful thing about a free society is what the hell does it matter? What I think. You know, it's like saying, would you buy an iPod? Well, whether I would buy an iPod or not has very little bearing on whether iPods exist, right?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
The real question, it's sort of the whole point of a free market, particularly in the area of defense and all that, the personal defense or even national defense and crime and punishment and the death penalty and so on is, well, what does it hugely matter what I think? Because I'll just be one of billions of consumers who are all being pitched to the most efficient and moral and cheapest methodologies for dealing with these kinds of crimes. Mm-hmm. I'll just be one potential guy buying some kind of security, right?
Oh, I see. As in, almost as if, you know, someone might buy a type of insurance, you would be just kind of, I don't know, subscribing to one kind of ideology as to.
Well, no. So it's like, so you say, do I think that health insurance should include demonic possession? Right?
Yeah.
Well, I wouldn't buy that. But, you know, whether I think it should or shouldn't is not the right question. If there's a market for it, then people will buy insurance for demonic possession, right? And I get that this is annoying and obtuse, and I'll get to my thoughts about it in a sec. But before I get to my thoughts, I want to point out why they don't matter that much. Right? I mean, there are lots of bands out there, I think, like, they sound sort of like a Chinese opera singer strangling a cat in a blender, right?
Right, and I understand that you enjoy Queen, and so for me to, you know, say, hey, man, for me to say something like, well, Queen's good,
it's not, look. Saying I enjoy Queen is like saying nuns enjoy Christ. It's as close as I'm willing to come to a secular religion, and in fact, it basically is a secular religion.
And Steph, I think it's pretty clear that you would support the death penalty for anyone that doesn't enjoy Queen, obviously.
I mean, who wouldn't?
No, it's more than supporting it. I think I would enforce it. I mean, so just, you know, obviously be aware of that.
Mandatory Queen listening for all.
Yeah, I mean, you know, Queen listening will continue until there's no other bands that you want to listen to, and that all makes perfect sense to me. So it doesn't hugely matter. So, would I buy security which included a death penalty? Well, I don't know. I'd have to hear the case, because let me tell you how I would sell you both, right? As a salesman, right? So if I think you're into the death penalty, like let's say I think you're not into the death penalty, right? So I would come to you and I'd say, listen, dude. Let me tell you how Steph's security works, right? First and foremost, we never ever want to get into a situation where there's a violent crime. Prevention, right? An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And so we offer insurance for schools. We offer insurance for childhood misdeeds. We offer insurance for parenting and all this kind of stuff. And so we regularly, you know, we'll meet with parents. We'll give them free brain scans to make sure their kids' brains are developing properly. We'll help them out with empathy training. You know, we'll make sure, we'll test the kids verbally, make sure that we'll test their motor reflexes when they see, you know, non-empathetic situations on a YouTube video, or I don't know, I'm just making stuff up. But all these things could be done, right? And we're going to make sure those mirror neurons develop in the right way in the right place. And then don't even have to worry about violent crime, because that person would no more stab someone else than you would pull your own tooth out, right? Assuming you're not Nick Nolte in some horrible film, which was one of the last films I ever saw with my family. So,
which film is that?
I can't remember. If somebody can look it up. It's a Nick Nolte film where it was just a completely horrifying film where he ends up pulling out his own tooth. Anyway, but so from that standpoint, you know, I'd be like, well, I don't want the death penalty, so we're going to work all about prevention. Now, if somebody does slip through our fingers, or something does happen, which could happen, right? People get brain tumors and just become violent or something like that. Well, then what we do is we confine and we work that person, right? Because we want them to pay restitution to the victims, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because right now, like under the current system, in the present, you're victimized during a crime. You're then re-victimized with unpaid time, effort, and energy during the court process, and then you're re-victimized a third time when you have to pay for the incarceration costs, right? So these are all pretty horrifying. The movie is called Affliction, by the way. It's the reason why I remember it as being one of the last movies I saw with my family. Anyway, so we obviously will confine that person. Let's say that they're first-degree murderer. Of course, if it's a brain tumor, then or whatever, right? But let's just say it happens, right? Then we do want restitution to be paid to the victims as much as possible, and therefore we're going to work that person. So it's not going to be a net cost to society. So that's that's one way you would sell it. And I don't know the degree to which I don't think that would even really occur. Violence in a peaceful society is like demonic possession in an atheist community. Like, it just doesn't really happen. It doesn't really fit.
Well, I was thinking about your kind of the idea that I really like, which is that you stop the violence towards children and you have a new society within 5 years. And then I think, well, what about that gap of 5 years where there are people who have, are kind of grandfathered out of the program, and they were still subject to violence and thus grow up to be sociopaths.
Oh yeah, no, listen, I get all this transitional stuff, right? I mean, I fully understand that, and of course there is a risk in making your children more empathetic if society's getting more sociopathic, and the levels of sociopathy have doubled in the last 15 years. So, which is that unless if you give your kids empathy and moral strength, you're really saving the world. If you give your kids empathy plus compliance, then you're just serving them up as sacrificial lambs to the predators among us, right? The intraspecies predators known as sociopaths. So there's all this transition and stuff. I'm just sort of saying how I would sell it if I was running the no death penalty. Now, the death penalty, as far as the moral justification occurs, clearly, I think we would understand that the death penalty in an immediate situation is perfectly valid, right? In other words, if you have to kill someone who's, say, beating your head against a sidewalk, then that is justified, right? Which is why George Zimmerman did not go to jail, right? Because he was acting within the legal bounds of self-defense, according to all of the available evidence and eyewitness accounts. So, in that situation, the death penalty, in other words, killing in an extremity of self-defense, we understand is valid. So, the death penalty in the moment is valid. Now, the question is the length of time involved. Now, let's say that you are a 15-year-old kid, and your bike is stolen. And it's your treasured bike, and it's the only bike you've got, and you can't get another one or whatever, right? And then 2 months later, you're walking down some neighborhood, and you see your bike lying on someone's lawn. No one's around, right? And, I mean, let's just say you remember the serial number, and you check the serial number, or whatever it is. You know for sure it's your bike.
Right.
Can you take it back?
Would I take it back? Yes,
Yeah.
I would.
Right. So there we have a 2-month gap wherein you can perform the same action that you could have performed immediately, right? So if some kid grabs your bike, bikes off, falls off your bike and runs away, you can go and get your bike back, right?
Mm-hmm.
In the moment. Now, 2 months later, you can perform exactly the same action, and it would be morally justified, right?
Yes.
So that's interesting, which is that if you can kill a man who's about to kill you in the moment, what's the big problem with doing it 2 months later? If you can recover your own property 2 months later, which is the same thing, you could do in the moment, right?
Yeah, I guess I must have missed a step, and forgive me, but how would you, within the metaphor, recovering the property would be getting restitution for the death of said family member or said...
Well, if you can kill a man, Like, so if you can steal a bike back in the moment that was stolen from you, we can also steal it 2 months later back. Mm-hmm. And if you can kill a man who's about to kill you in the moment, can you not also kill him 2 months later? Now, you could make the argument that one is preventing a death in the moment, right? Mm-hmm. And in the other one, you're not actually being threatened with death in the moment, right?
Yes.
But nonetheless, we do have a situation with the bike where whether it takes place in the moment or 2 months later is immaterial. You can still perform the act of recovering your property in the moment or 2 months later. So again, this doesn't answer everything, but it does mean, because everyone says, well, you can shoot the guy in self-defense, but you can't go 2 months later and shoot him.
Yeah, and I can see how the end result is the same with the bike scenario. So I mean, it's equally applicable, and I'm sure that there are some people that would say, well, there's 2 months of my time and without my bike, but I mean the desired result is still achieved. You've gotten the bike back, so I can see how that.
Yeah. So basically, you are acting in a manner you're acting in a manner that's independent of time and still acting in a justified manner, right? With the bike, right? Doesn't matter whether you do it right now or 2 months from now to recover your property. Both are justified morally, right? So shooting a guy who's about to kill you in the moment versus shooting a guy. If someone shoots a guy, I can shoot him, right? Right. We see this with mall shootings, right? So mall shooters or the shooters who particularly the American phenomenon, you get some guy shooting. So if you see a guy shooting someone, you can shoot him, right? And you'll be a hero, right?
Yeah, I would imagine in most cases. I mean, there's a recent trend where the guy that does shoot the guy that is shooting people is somehow demonized or villainized. But he's not charged, right? I mean, under common law traditions, if I see someone shooting a bunch of people and I shoot that person, in no way, shape, or form will I be charged with murder. Yeah.
Right? And the shooters know this, which is why they try to go to places where guns are banned, right? School campuses and the Aurora shooter, the Batman movie shooter, he went to a movie theater where there was no guns allowed. He drove out of his way to go there, right? So if you shoot a shooter, you are not charged. That is legal and viable under certainly common law traditions and in the U.S. So if I can shoot a guy who's been shooting a bunch of people in the moment, can I shoot him later? Well, you could say, well, in the moment he's shooting people, right? But if I see him later, I don't know if he's free, so I don't know if he's going to be shooting other people in the future, right? Mm-hmm. So, and I don't have this is not a perfect answer to all of this, and I understand that we're just tossing around a couple of theoreticals, but this time slice is always given as to why self-defense is valid in the moment, but not a month or two later. But if getting your own property back is valid in the moment and is also valid 2 or 3 months later, then we've already said that the same action is independent of time. The morality of the action of recovering property is independent of time.
It's an interesting juxtaposition. It's an interesting kind of those two kind of parallel storylines almost. It's how interesting it is. But they're not.
Right, so the only point is to take out the time slice. Mm-hmm. Because there's very few people who will argue that self-defense in the moment is invalid, right? You can't shoot someone who's trying to kill you. You can't kill someone who's trying to kill you. But then they say, well, but, you know, so that is a death penalty. But then they say, well, when time has elapsed, then it's not valid. But that's not the case with theft, right? So I just want to take in the time equation. I'm not saying this solves the whole problem and it's like and therefore whatever, right? But I'm just saying taking the time aspect of the crime and response, you can take the time aspect out with regards to property, so it's not immediately clear to me why you immediately can't take, you can't have that time aspect still there for murder, right? If you can get your own property back 2 months later, can you not shoot someone 2 months later? Now, of course, you then would be subject to all of the, if you were caught, right, you would be subject to all of the checks and balances of whatever system was in place to make sure you didn't shoot the wrong guy or whatever it is. So I'm just saying that stuff is complicated and challenging. And certainly it would be a deterrent to murderers if they knew that anyone who shot them and was right about shooting them months later would not get prosecuted, that would make being a murderer a bit more tricky, right?
Yeah, and I was even thinking in the way of, again, like I said before, this kind of stems from a prejudice about children, or, towards people that hurt children. I think it would be a deterrent towards people who are actively seeking to hurt children that, there is a very strict death policy. There is like a zero tolerance policy when it comes to the murder or the sexual abuse of children,
Yeah, I mean, not strictly people who are seeking to hurt children, because then there'd be the death penalty for spanking, right? So, but I know what you mean, right? So people who are committing egregiously evil acts, right? So in the novel American Psycho, if you've ever read it, the guy in the zoo, right? I mean, he's okay, right? Well, so that would be. So you would probably subscribe to a dispute resolution organization that would enforce the death penalty for child murderers, right?
Yeah, probably. Well, I mean, yes, actually, I would. I mean, there was that guy. He was a singer for some band in the UK, and he was a. I'm never sure. I always get the two mixed up. He was either a pedophile or a pederast, but he had definitely.
Gary Glitter.
Yeah, no, not Gary Glitter. It's some guy from some band from the 2000s. I think they were called the Lost Prophets. And so he said in his conviction, he said that he was happy that they were going to put him away for 35 years because he was a enthusiastic and dedicated predator. And I also heard a sex therapist talk, some guy who's been working with specifically men for the past 35 years, and he says the hardest thing to cure is the man who has already crossed the line, or the woman for that matter, who has already crossed the line into the sexual abuse of children or violence towards children. And he said...
Yeah, I mean, I've made this argument for many years that the conscience short-circuits and is no longer available for recovery when you have done an evil for which there is no restitution.
Mm.
And there's no restitution possible for the rape of a child. Or the murder of a child.
Right.
Like, there's no parent who would say, well, okay, if you give me $10 million, you can murder my child, right? Right. If somebody said, listen, Steph, if I steal your bike, I'll give you $10 million, right? It's like, well, then basically you're just buying my bike for an absurd amount of money, right? And, but for certain ills, there is no restitution that is possible. Mm-hmm. And where restitution is impossible, forgiveness is impossible. And where forgiveness is impossible, it seems to me that incarceration, the isolation of the human virus from the community, is the right thing to do. I don't view humanity as a single species, right? I don't view. It's like saying dogs are a single species, right? I mean, they kind of are, but not rabid dogs. I mean, they're dogs that are sick and dangerous and all that kind of stuff, right? And so I don't view humanity as a single species because we're not all the same. There are human predators, and there are human victims, and there are human heroes, and there are human villains, and right, we're a whole ecosystem of ethics. And this is very well supported by the science. This is not just me with some medieval slice and dice ethical approach. Human beings in no way, shape, or form are all equal. This is part of the endless danger of the concept of the soul, that inside the sociopath is some tender-hearted, God-created essence that can be somehow contacted through some mystical ritual involving a guy with a funny collar, right? I mean, it's not how the brain works, not how the brain develops. And we segregate human beings from predators. I mean, there's a reason why the tiger is in the cage, right? Because the tiger is a predator, and people want to go and visit the predator and so on, but because it's cool, you can take cool pictures. But you know, if somebody notices that the cage is open, I mean, everyone gets the fuck out of there as quickly as humanly possible, right? And a tiger is a far less dangerous predator than a human being is.
So
far less dangerous.
I studied anthropology for 2 years before the relativism just drove me fucking insane. And
all cultures are equal.
Yeah, I mean, it's this idea that, I mean, I'll go off on a huge tangent on it, but I mean, I won't go off on a huge tangent about it, but I mean, I just was thinking to myself, I was listening to these professors talk about cultural relativism and this idea that you can't judge one culture against another, and I'm like, what they're essentially saying is that genital mutilation is acceptable for both men and women as long as it's under the guise of a cultural norm, or that the force feeding of children is acceptable, or that the forced body mutilation of children into the rite of passage is acceptable, or the beating of women for getting raped is acceptable. And having professors say, well, it's important to maintain. I had one professor actually have the gall to say objective relativism when looking at Middle Eastern culture, and saying, well, there's a lot of precious information there. And, I mean, my response, of course, at this point, I didn't want to argue with him.
I'm sorry, I don't understand that. What do you mean there's a lot of precious information there?
Oh, he was saying that, meaning that there's a lot of information about what not to do in a culture, what not to do in a society, as far as my opinion. Yeah, exactly. I mean, these are things that, at least in my opinion, in my class, as I dropped from that major, I just found that these are culture, and these are people who are to learn what not to do. These are examples of mistakes, and yet you've still got people saying, oh, look at how one they are with nature, and if it's the cruel first world that's ruining their natural rhythm.
Wait, cruel first world? I thought you couldn't judge cultures.
Right, exactly.
So would these people say that the Holocaust was not wrong because that's just where the German culture was at the time?
I think that with anthropology, man, the second you begin to go into that kind of challenge, there becomes this interesting shell of, well, anthropology is a soft science, and we're only to collect metadata or swaths of data. We're not supposed to be quantifying or qualifying.
I love
anything.
It. Hang on, did they really say that it's a soft science?
Yes, actually, I had for 2 years. I had professors tell me that it was a soft science.
No, but saying that something is a soft science is like saying, "Honey, I have a soft erection." It's like, well, wait, which is it? If it's an erection, well, then it's something you should be able to sharpen a blade on, and if it's not an erection, then please don't call it an erection, right?
Right.
If it's a science, then it can't be soft, right? It's math spoken by made-up unicorns where the numbers are my imaginary friends. It's like, that's soft math, right? It's like the Storm Clouds Gathering guy who was saying, well, I did say it was airborne. I did say Ebola had gone airborne, but I was using the term airborne in a layperson sense, in a layman sense, because I'm not an expert. It's like, nope. Right. Layman doesn't mean wrong. It does not. When I say 2 and 2 make 5, I'm really speaking about that in the layman sense. It's like, nope, that's just wrong. Layman means you're not specifically trained in the field. It doesn't mean you get to pass off your incorrect statements as somehow, well, I'm using these in the layman terms. Like, no, you're just using them incorrectly.
Right.
I mean, when I say that there are unicorns in space, I'm obviously using it as a layman physicist. It's like, nope, it's just wrong all around. So anyway, and we could sort of spend a lot of time on that nonsense. But no, this is all just self-hatred from, white Western Europeans, right? I mean, we're just raised to hate ourselves, right? We're just bad. All cultures are fine, except white Western Europeans. Well, we're just bad. We're just bad. We're polluters. We're colonialists. We're just terrible, terrible people. All other cultures live in one with nature and are all kinds of wonderful and soft and fuzzy, even if they hack off the labia of their little girls. But, you see, white Western Europeans, well, you're just bad. You're just the devil incarnate. And, I mean, this is just part of the general... that's a whole other topic, which we'll get into another time.
Right.
But this is why you only ever hear these pejoratives applied to, frankly, non-white, non-Western races and cultures. They're just, it's just, we've got this, I mean, again, speaking collectively, sort of white Western Europeans have developed a lot of empathy, which is why we kind of work to end slavery and give women suffrage. We got a lot of empathy. And some of the less empathetic cultures around there are like, ooh, Whitey got mirror neurons. Excellent. Now we can harvest them for fun and profit. So we'll turn him against himself, we'll make him guilty, and we'll turn all the whites into Catholics, and we'll be the priests.
I had to give a presentation on how racism is not a two-dimensional idea. It's a three-dimensional idea. It can apply between blacks and whites, Hispanics and Eskimos. It's not simply just only white people can be racist. And the response...
Did you also get the... I'm sorry, no, go ahead.
Oh, the response that I got was, you are a racist, and thank you for contributing to the racist agenda. I mean, it was... Right. I got torn down for it, and I stood my ground, of course, for 15 minutes, but it was just brutal to see how willing people are to just flagellate them. I think that's the word. Just self-flagellation of just, oh, my whiteness is my... It's almost like this... It's just odd. It's an odd symptom, I guess, of the community college, or any college level introductory and advanced anthropology classes.
Oh yeah, no. I mean, look. That's the whites are the ones you can hate. Yes. The whites are the ones you can hate. I mean, this is the only group. And then people say, well, you see, race, it's just a social construct, right? Which is why Aboriginals in Australia constantly give birth to blonde, blue-eyed, Norwegian-looking kids. It's like, right. It's not a social construct. And even if race is a social construct, these people should immediately try and get rid of affirmative action, right? Immediately. But they never do. Right? They never say race is a social construct, and therefore we must get rid of affirmative action, we must get rid of the Civil Rights Act, we must whatever it is that's got quotas and crap like that because it's a fiction, right? They never say that. Race is just a social construct. When people start talking about biological differences between the races, suddenly then the big defense is, well, it's all just made up stuff, Like the different races of dogs are all just social constructs. It's like, nope, they're really not. They're quite different. A Dalmatian is different from a poodle. It's not just a social construct. It's not something we made up out of nothing.
There's a book called Festival Elephants and the Myth of Global Poverty, and this guy basically goes into and he says, stop donating, stop giving your money to countries that you think are poorer than you are because you are destroying their infrastructure. And if you stopped paying attention to the pictures of the starving Ecuadorian children and deciding to send your 35 cents a day so that they don't have to, or basically so these funds can go into paying NGOs who basically do nothing other than supply, water filters that don't work. It's just fascinating the lack of information that people have, and the idea that they can put $1.50 inside of an envelope, send it to El Salvador or send it to South Sudan and say, I have done my part, my European guilt has been appeased, and I can now go to the wine mixer and let everyone know that I'm supporting Ricardo. And he's going to second grade for the first time this week. And it's all because of me.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's... I don't know what European guilt is supposed to mean about all this kind of stuff. That's just kind of collective nonsense, right?
Right.
I guess, Africa now has like roads and cars and cell phones and medicine and all this kind of stuff. And, when the Europeans first got to sub-Saharan Africa, I'm not talking about Egypt, when Europeans first got to sub-Saharan Africa, they hadn't invented the wheel. They had no written language. They had never built a two-story structure. And now they have some pretty useful stuff. They've got antibiotics, kind of helpful, right, when you get sick. And of course, yeah, obviously there was brutality and all that, of course. No question about all of that. But it's just something to sort of point out. Would you rather live in Africa now or before the Europeans came? I mean, of course you'd rather live in Africa now. South Africa in particular, which is why even under apartheid, which was the immoral system, it's a statist system, but why under apartheid the blacks were all swarming to get into South Africa, because where and of course the economic development of nations now is pretty much divided between those that used to be European colonies and those that didn't. And those that didn't used to be European colonies are generally doing a lot worse. So it's complicated. It's not as simple as white bad, right?
You see the kind of influx of Islam from the east moving west, and then you see, I might be getting my directions messed up here, but you're getting the effects of Islam moving in, and then you get the effects of Christianity and Catholicism moving in, and they're meeting in the middle, and you're getting this terrible kind of ideological battle going on. And then you have essentially illiterate people fighting over books and resources, or ideologies and resources that they don't even know. It's almost as if they don't know their own history. They just kind of allow it to repeat itself every 15 years.
No, it's because they have a scapegoat. The scapegoat.
I'm going to pause it right there. We are joined with JJ. JJ, you there?
No, this is not JJ.
Oh, who is this?
This is Doug Ball. I call this number off of a geoengineering website.
Okay.
Sorry,
you're on the Anti-Tyranny News Radio broadcast here.
On the I'm sorry?
Anti-Tyranny News Radio on UCY.TV.
Okay. Well, then I was responding to a website that Russ with UTC had given out this number, and I guess that was during that certain time. I apologize.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, I'm sorry, and geez, I wish I was listening to what you're talking about now, because I think more people need to be aware of what's going on this planet.
Yes, I do. Well, thanks for calling in, then.
You bet. Thank you.
Okay, back to clip.
So it is white guys. Right? Why is Africa doing badly? Why is Africa doing badly? It's because of white guys and colonialism. Right? Why are the blacks in America doing so badly? Well, it's because of whites and slavery. Right? And whenever you have a scapegoat, you get paralyzed. Whenever you sort of wake up in the morning and say, well, my whole community is doing really badly because of those guys over there, you get to pour all of your rage and hatred and resentment and frustration into that other group. And then you don't have to look inward, because you have an external source of blame for all of your community's problems. And when you have that, all you focus on is being angry, being resentful, and you become manipulative, and you become stuck. And this is why acceptance of white guilt is one of the most racist things, I believe, that can be done to any other group.
What is that? I've not heard of that. I mean, I've heard of the white man's privilege before, but I've never heard of white guilt before.
You've never heard of white guilt? Weren't you in anthropology?
No,
we were just talking about all this.
I might have heard of it. I might have. It's because it just sounds like white noise to me. It just sounds like this kind of very foreign concept. I mean,
no. Look, white guilt is when white guilt is when a white person says that the ills of another community are because of whites.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
And that is a terrible and destructive and racist thing to do. To me, accepting unearned guilt, when you accept unearned guilt, what you do is you strip other people, other groups, other communities of moral agency. I mean, if I were to accept any kind of collective emotion, I would feel pride in the degree to which Europeans ended slavery, and the degree to which Europeans, through the Renaissance and the Enlightenment, created some of the freest societies the world has ever experienced, and the degree to which Europeans, white Western Europeans, have created some of the most beautiful music, some of the greatest works of art, some of the greatest works of literature, and contributed to some of the greatest technology to the world, right? As I've talked about before, the scientific method, philosophy, mathematics. Mathematics a little bit less, because there was a lot going on in the East. But modern medicine, the free market, the scientific method, and philosophy as a whole largely came out of white Western European culture. And these are the greatest benefits and boons that the world has ever known. And so and I don't, but if I were to take collective pride, I would take pride in all that. And mistaking the white race for the masters of the white race is incredibly racist. Right? So, because the Western Europeans generally, and again, I'm speaking very broadly here, came up with the free market, we became the most valuable slaves, right? We were the most productive tax livestock the world had ever seen, which has a lot to do with why so many wars were fought after the Industrial Revolution. Why was the 20th century the century of war? Because we were the geese laying the golden eggs. So everyone was fighting over control over the Western Europeans. And, I mean, it was horrifying and horrible. And that's what happens when you don't finish the job of becoming free. I talked about this in the Israel-Palestine thing recently. You have to finish the job of becoming free. Which means if you have a free market, get rid of the government. Finish the job of becoming free. Otherwise, all you're doing is feeding the beasts that rule the species. But so, I mean, if I were to take collective pride, which I don't, but if I were, right? But I sure as hell, if I'm going to deny myself collective pride, I sure as hell am not going to take any collective guilt. Me and slavery? Are you kidding me? Me and colonialism? Are you kidding me?
Well, the same thing happens with feminism.
How fucking racist is it? How racist is it to blame current whites for the actions of people who ruled over whites in the past? Blaming current whites for slavery is exactly like blaming African slaves for slavery. They weren't in charge, and guess what, people? We weren't in charge either. It was the 1%, it was the 2%, the priests and the psycho kings and the aristocracy who were in charge. And it is so destructive to other races and cultures to say, your problems are my fault? Give me a break. Racism means treating everyone the same. Sorry, anti-racism means treating everyone the same. And that means I don't take collective guilt, I don't take collective pride in being white or Western or European. I think there's a great heritage, and I think there's a lot to be proud of, and that culture, which happens to have been particularly influential on me growing up. But no, I don't make collective statements. I don't make collective statements. And the idea that somehow white people in the here and now are to blame for the actions of our feudal overlords a couple of 100 years ago is insane and so destructive to other races. Because if you accept guilt, you strip other people of their moral agency. No. The issues in the black cultures and the black communities are the issues in the black cultures and the black communities. And if the whites had said, well, it's our rulers and it's our overlords and it's our masters who are to blame for everything, and there's nothing we can do about it, well, then there never would have been these free cultures and these free societies. There never would have been this struggle to create moral agency in the here and now. So anyway, I just sort of want to point that out, that it just, I consider it incredibly destructive to other cultural groups to accept something as nebulous and ridiculous as white guilt. Anyway, it's probably a bit of a tangent, but go ahead.
Actually, you know what, man? I think we completely went from death penalty to relativist nonsense through cultural back to white guilt. I think it's all kind of tangentially related. I was actually going to say that this is an awful lot like feminism, this idea that I think it's only like, 1 or 2% of men actually, I mean, I'm not sure about the statistics. I think you would know better than I would. It's about 1 or 2% of men actually commit rape. Correct?
It depends on how you define it. I've heard
Okay.
estimates as high as 6%.
Okay.
But as far as some of that is fuzzy drunk stuff.
Okay. So let's
And,
say 4%. Let's say 4 or 5%.
No, but serial rapists are very like the rapists who are serial rapists. Is 1 or 2%, if I remember rightly,
Okay.
of men.
So when I engage in conversations with people, I often hear that this is a men's issue. It is just almost ubiquitously, or it is just perpetually a men's issue. And I think, well, why am I being criminalized? Why am I being assaulted for the actions of a deviant few? And why is it that...
Well, no, because you let it happen.
Yeah, right?
I mean, not you, but it's because let's just say white males let it happen. Because we are concerned and we are guilty and we are ethical and we are, whatever, right? We have more compassion, maybe more, I don't know what the science is, right? But, I mean, white Western males were the ones who created free societies, who developed the free market, who built modern civilization, who freed the slaves, who, gave votes to women and all this kind of stuff, right? So, we've done a lot collectively, again, just to use that loose collective stuff. We've done a lot of positive stuff. And it's true, we've been ordered at gunpoint to do a lot of terrible stuff too, right? Right, be drafted or be shot. Go over the First World War trench or be shot by. So yes, under compulsion, collectively, we've been told to do a lot of terrible stuff for which people should have sympathy, right? It wasn't like the average white guy was like, yay, World War I, I can't wait, right? I mean, a few of them were, of course, but that's just because there hadn't been any wars in Western Europe for over 100 years, almost 100 years.
Right, or the propaganda machine that says that, war is, that whole... I mean, the Edward Bernays was just a propaganda genius. So, I mean, getting these guys to really dehumanize their, people in Germany and Japan, and then the whole, buy war bonds and how great it is and how successful war can be and how profitable war can be. I mean, those are really sold, too, don't you think?
Well, yeah, but it's not like white males are the only ones that are susceptible to that. I mean, I do believe there's tribalism in Africa too. I mean, I believe there was quite a lot of slaughters in Rwanda between a bunch of different groups all calling each other cockroaches and stuff, right? So, I mean, yes, terrible stuff happened in the West for sure. Absolutely, absolutely terrible stuff happened in the West. But it wasn't like this was some collective white male thing. I mean, there was a whole bunch of people on plantations, but there were the people in charge, and there were the people who were the slaves. And anyone who has the gun is the guy in charge. And the government and the aristocracy were in charge of the raising of the children, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, there's no free market in childhood, and there hasn't been in the West for almost 150 years. It's all run by the government, and all accepted by women. If women said no government schools tomorrow, there'd be no government schools tomorrow, because women outvote men, right? So, and of course, all of these rapists were raised by women, and so it's just a purely male issue. We just have to say no to this stuff. Like, it's great to have empathy, but you have to have boundaries. It's great to have sympathy, but you have to have standards. Because if you have sympathy and you wade into, without having your wits really about you, into a bunch of a sort of pea soup of manipulative, grabby people who themselves don't seem to have a lot of empathy, you're screwed. You're lamb to slaughter, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's what frequently happens to me. I come into groups of people having conversations, and I don't like to consider them debates. I like to consider them to be constructive conversations. But they turn so quickly into battlegrounds and rhetoric and this kind of ideologies and a lot of kind of It's almost as if people are so unwilling to change hardline, rigid ideas. And then I always add the caveat.
Oh no! Come on. Come on, man. You've got to be smarter than that. I know you're smarter than that.
What do you mean?
Sorry to sound impatient.
No.
People cry racist at whites because it gets them stuff. Right? It's not, they're so hard, rigid ideas. It's like bullshit. People love to get new cell phones, right?
Right.
They're very happy to adopt and embrace new things and new ideas, right? How many people are like, no, I still want to write letters by hand because I'm just not into embracing new ideas and new thoughts and new things. No, there's a huge swath of humanity that has developed verbal abilities to extract resources from guilt-ridden people. And they used to be priests, and now they're leftists, right? Make someone feel guilty, and they will pay you to alleviate that guilt. And leftism and the racism of white guilt, it's just the new Catholicism. It's just the new original sin. Oh, make people feel bad. And look, who doesn't feel bad about shitty things that white cultures have done in the past? Of course. Of course. Well, white people the most, right? But I also feel shitty about terrible things that black cultures have done in the past as well. I feel shitty about the terrible things that Chinese and Japanese cultures have done in the past as well. I feel shitty about what Eskimos have done to each other in the past as well.
Terrible Eskimo wars.
Issue, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And, but no, people, there's part of the sort of human ecosystem, there are the verbal manipulators who have developed language skills in order to pierce the boundaries of moral confidence and mine any potential guilt they can spread like a virus within the minds of their victims. And just say no. I mean, I can talk about what white Western Europeans did 300 years ago. That's terrible stuff. What's that? Nothing to do with me.
Right.
And people try that crap with me all the time. Oh, racism. I mean, every time I put anything out, I'm sure I'll get it from this one too. And all it is a confession of impotence. Tell me where the facts I have quoted are mistaken. Tell me where the moral arguments I have quoted are illogical or contradicted by the evidence. But anybody who just cries racism, you know what they're like? They're like, have you ever done that? I'm sure you have, right? So you put money into some vending machine, right? And the vending machine doesn't give you your bag of chips or your pop or whatever, right?
Yes.
And what do?
Yeah, you usually press the button or shake it or
push a bunch of buttons, right? I got to push a bunch of buttons, maybe shake the machine a bit, and then look at that warning about it toppling and killing you. And you're like, well, I'm thirsty, but not that thirsty, right? Right, so they're just people pushing buttons trying to get some free chips. And by this, I don't mean blacks, just so everyone knows. I don't mean that at all. I mean, that's part of it. A lot of white intellectuals and white liberals and white academics and white researchers and reporters. I mean, it's not a black-white thing or a Hispanic thing or whatever. Nothing to do with that. It's just that there are people who would rather, and we all know that religion has had a huge impact. It's been one of the most central driving forces, for worse and sometimes for better, in human history, which means we have a whole host of humanity, a whole group of humanity that has evolved the specific idea to instill guilt, to instill negative emotions in others, and then be paid for their alleviation, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's the same idea. I'm sorry to cut you off, but it's the same idea of the Catholic Church. And I'm totally spacing on it right now, but there was the idea that you could go in and pay to have your
indulgences.
Yeah. Same concept.
In fact, this is what Luther got so mad about, is eventually it got to the point where you could pay ahead of time. Like, I'm going to go have a dirty weekend with Queen Guinevere, and so here's my $10. I want to be forgiven in advance. And they'd be like, yeah, go have fun. We'll take your money, right?
Right.
So if you can infect people with an imaginary illness, then they'll pay for an imaginary cure. They'll pay to just feel better in the moment. And so if you can infect whites with racist guilt patterns, then they'll give you affirmative action. They'll give you extra considerations. They'll give you funding. They'll give you grants. Right? I mean, it's just pushing buttons, trying to get your bag of chips.
Yeah, and I mean,
and I don't blame people for trying. I blame everyone else for not going. Nope, no, we can't blame people in the here and now for what a bunch of white rulers did a couple of 100 years ago.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't make any sense. It makes no sense at all.
Well, no, and it is interesting that you pointed, because this whole time I've been thinking for many months now that it's just, this is just people's ignorance, but it's not their ignorance. People are completely aware of what they're doing. Everyone knows that where their cell phones come from in China, nobody gives a fuck about the muscle atrophy or the coltan production or whatever. They really care about the price of it, how cool it looks, and then being able to use that same product that uses coltan to blog about how awful coltan production is. I mean, it's kind of...
I don't know what you're talking about. Atrophy coltan?
What coltan? Coltan is like, I don't know, maybe one of the people in the chat room can do it. It's some mineral that they use to power cell phones, laptops. I mean, it's like an intricate mineral, right? It's found in Africa. And so what I was saying is that so people will buy the iPhone, they'll buy the iPad, whatever. They'll blog about how awful coltan is while that product is using coltan. Do you understand?
Oh, yeah, no, I get it. I mean, look, people can blog about whatever. It's just nonsense, right? But it's just, I mean, an environmentalist, another one of these two, you're just guilty for breathing, right? You're just guilty for being alive. And, you know, like Thunderfoot made a comment on the other day that human beings cost $500,000 to raise, which is actually false. The highest estimate I could come up with is $250,000. And somehow this is a net cost to the planet, you know, like somehow human beings are a net loss to the planet. And it's just, you know, and again, it's just original sin. It's the same crap. Can you make people feel guilty for drawing a breath? If you can, then they will pay you lots of money to make them feel better, right?
Right. Well, so back to my original question.
Let's finish up because we've got to get to the next caller.
Yeah,
but,
yeah.
So as far as the death penalty goes, yeah, I don't know. I think that people will focus a lot more on prevention in the future, like in a free society. So I think it won't be a huge issue. I frankly don't care if a murderer gets killed. It's not big on my list of moral issues in the world to deal with. It matters now, really, because there's a government and there's a centralized legal system, and it's going to be legal or it's not. But I just, if some guy goes and shoots someone, the fate, assuming that they're guilty, right, the fate of that person, whether they're killed or they're put in prison, I think that generally, if they can work and produce some sort of restitution for the victims, that probably is better. And certainly the possibility of killing someone by mistake is there. It's almost incomprehensible. I mean, they just get so many appeals. But it certainly is possible that it could happen. But I don't have any particularly strong views either way, because all of this stuff is so preventable, right? It's sort of like saying, well, how are we going to handle polio? Vaccine! Yay, we're done, right? And so we know what the vaccine is for violence. It's peaceful parenting. And so I'll work on promoting the vaccine. I don't really care what happens in the long run once the vaccine's in place, because it's just going to be so rare as to be ridiculous, right? I mean, you don't worry about polio, right?
Yeah.
It used to be terrifying for everyone. Terrifying. Like, literally, you go to one public pool where there's a polio virus floating around, and you could be in an iron lung or dead or paralyzed like FDR for the rest of your life. Terrifying. You don't worry about it now because we got a vaccine. So I just work on promoting the vaccine for violence. How we deal with violence down the future, it's literally like saying, well, how do we deal with smallpox now? Well, we had a vaccine. So we don't have to worry about it, right?
Yeah.
All right. Move on?
Yeah, sure. And thank you for your time. If you don't mind, I'd like to plug my band real quick, if I can do that. Take up some shameless self-promotion.
Yeah.
The band's called El Camino Sutra. Anybody that's interested in looking into it. And Stefan, thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Wait, spell that thing,
man. ELCAMINOSUTRA. El Camino Sutra. And we have
Kama Sutra. All right.
We have a new EP.
What kind of music is it?
It's like indie rock. It's like we got a guy sounds like Neil Young. Our new EP is coming out in like 2 weeks, so it should be pretty good. I'm pretty excited about it.
Great. Well, I hope people will look you up. Thanks for your call.
Yeah, thanks, Stefan.
That's the end of that clip. My whole take on it is justifiable. You have a right to defense of your person or property. When it comes to if they murdered someone, I think once you abridge other people's rights, definitely intentionally abridging their rights, you tend to lose your own. But that doesn't mean that someone that murdered someone still doesn't, in a natural law, still have a right to self-defense. They have that right, but others view them as the opposite of someone that upholds rights. They took the rights away from others, therefore they might be justified in that. Now, I think there is a problem in society when you have someone that, they murdered this person's family, therefore now this complete stranger out of nowhere claims the right to take that person's life. I think that's what feeds to the violence in society. Other people that have no emotional connection or no rightful connection to it become the murderers and the abusers. And I think that's how violence gains in society. And I think Ferguson is a perfect example, and ISIS is a perfect example. And they're trying to conjure up some ISIS threats, and I don't know if they're conjured up. They could be, real threats, but they're definitely trying to push to go into Syria. I've heard a lot of rhetoric going around trying to encourage people to encourage going into Syria, which they've been trying to do. And then you have Obama come out from the other side of the spectrum going, see, if I would have been able to go into Syria, we won't have this problem. So we have, it seems to be playing each other. Been a little surprised here. Let me check something here. I've seen a couple posts by Eric Barlow on We Are Change, but I haven't seen anything for a couple weeks, I believe, from Luke. Let's see if I can... Let's see if I can find anything. It looks like he might have been doing some live streaming, maybe. But he has been tweeting out. It's kind of getting worried there. He's not the only one that I haven't seen a lot of things coming out from, and I really think that's because I think a lot of it has to do with the whole Ferguson thing. I think there's a lot of deception. We'll say deception. There's a lot of deception coming from both sides. Deception where you have infiltrators and the protesters trying to incite a lot of violence. And to make clear, I'm saying it's not the peaceful protesters that are calling for something. But I think the whole protest was stirred up by people that had a intent to use the protest to their advantage for their own agenda. And I think the same is coming from law enforcement, where they're just trying to put out anything to try to get the heat off of them without really waiting until a proper investigation. And I think both of those in conjuncture playing into, we need martial law, there's going to be violence, divide and conquer, it's that same old game over and over and over. And it gets to a point where it really gets discouraging when you look at that. But, what do you expect out of a population that is just so drawn down from the abuse from law enforcement? We have law enforcement now, and it's not natural law. This law enforcement is based off of ownership over you. The right to tell you what kind of light bulbs you can produce or have or buy, what you're allowed to put in your own body. It gets to a point where people just say, well, I'm a criminal no matter what I do. And these people are there to catch me doing something wrong. Even if I don't know if I'm doing something wrong, they're there to catch me doing that something wrong. They are there to take my freedom if I slip up. We don't have that peace officer. We've lost peace officers, and we've now have a society of law enforcement, and it's focused on man's law over others. Until we're willing to admit that in our own law enforcement, it's not going to change. People are like, yes, that's why we don't need law. It's not going to happen that way. Unless it's a violent, which it'll end up just creating a system that will probably turn out to be worse. I have a short clip. This one on Next News Network, and this one is titled Bombing the Truth. And Washington has been at war in Iraq for 24 years, starting with Operation Desert Shield and Desert Storm in 1990. So stated Congressman Ron Paul in a recent column. The twice presidential candidate added shortly after Iraq's invasion of Kuwait in 1990, the propaganda machine began agitating for a U.S. attack on Iraq. And I'll play a clip here. And this kind of feed into this whole ISIS thing.
Washington has been at war in Iraq for 24 years, starting with Operations Desert Shield and Desert Storm in 1990. So stated former Congressman Ron Paul in a recent column. The twice presidential candidate added, shortly after Iraq's invasion of Kuwait in 1990, the propaganda machine began agitating for a U.S. attack on Iraq. Paul recalled the appearance before Congress of a young Kuwaiti woman claiming that the Iraqis were ripping Kuwaiti babies from their incubators. However, the woman turned out to be the daughter of a Kuwaiti ambassador to the United States. As Paul noted, her story was false, but it was enough to spur a U.S.-led attack on Iraq. Paul added, this month, yet another U.S. president, the fourth in a row, began bombing Iraq. He is also placing U.S. troops on the ground, despite promising not to do so. The second Iraq war started in March of 2003, and it has cost the U.S. some $2 trillion. It's possible that more than 1 million civilian deaths occurred as a result of that second war. Paul went on to write, millions of tons of U.S. bombs have fallen in Iraq almost steadily since 1991. And what have we accomplished? Where are we now, 24 years later? We are back where we started, at war in Iraq. And as we've been reporting, a shadowy terrorist army, usually called the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, or ISIS, is the latest target in this, the third U.S. war in Iraq. The pretext for it is that the religious minorities in the Kurdish region came under ISIS attack. The U.S. government and most media warned that up to 100,000 vulnerable people, including about 40,000 stranded on a mountain, could be slaughtered if the U.S. did not intervene. But as Paul noted, Americans unfortunately once again fell for this propaganda, and U.S. bombs began to fall. However, it was determined that only about 2,000 were on the mountain, and many of them had been living there for years. And as Paul understands it, they didn't want to be rescued. Mr. Paul, an ardent non-interventionist, often critiques what he sees as Washington's needless and super expensive military misadventures. The plight of Kurds and other ISIS victims is clearly tragic, but Paul noted that Washington's hypocrisy and contradictions are also tragic. And as Paul pointed out, why is it that the U.S. government did not say a word when 3 out of 4 Christians were forced out of Iraq during the 10-year U.S. occupation? Why has the U.S. said nothing about the Christians slaughtered by its allies in Syria? What about all the Palestinians killed in Gaza or the ethnic Russians killed in East Ukraine? Furthermore, the respected investigative website Global Research has published ISIS articles worthy of careful consideration. Quoting Global Research writer Tony Cartalucci, WHDT reporter Mark Anderson noted the following.
Portrayed by various names by the Western media, ISIS, in reality, is a conglomerate of Western-backed mercenary forces raised to overthrow the government in Damascus, Syria, and confront Iranian influence across the entire region, including in Lebanon and in Iraq. Cartalucci added, clearly, these successful U.S. airstrikes in Iraq must be carried over into Syria, where mission creep can do the rest, finally dislodging the Syrian government from power after an ongoing proxy war has failed to do so since 2011.
Lamenting Washington's latest bombings in Iraq, Paul summarized, no declaration, no authorization, not even a debate.
Now, think about that. The same excuse when we were in Afghanistan fighting the terrorists, the same excuse that they kind of used for Iraq is, well, all the Taliban and Al Qaeda, they're going they're going to Iraq. They're being, safe over there in Iraq. And Iraq has weapons of mass destruction. So we need to go in Iraq and take out the government there and, go after Al-Qaeda over there. Even though at that point Al-Qaeda was not really welcome by the Iraqi government. They try to link them up together. And they use that excuse to go in Iraq, and then you find out, well, basically everything they told us was false. It was propaganda. Well, now you have them going, well, ISIS, which is Al-Qaeda, they're coming into Iraq and they're coming out of Syria, so we should have to go into Syria, and Syria probably still has weapons of mass destruction, I'm sure. So, we'll have to go in there and go after the ISIS, Al-Qaeda. Sounds like the same old propaganda that we've heard multiple times. The same propaganda. And it's not getting any better. Now we have them hyping it up while our border remains wide open. We have where these activists can dress up as, Bin Laden and run across the border. And nothing. As Elvis and run across the border. Nothing. But we're supposed to be scared about the people that are over in Iraq and over in Syria. You still have to get groped to go on a flight, or radiated to go on a flight. But the borders are wide open. What about this says, oh yeah, we're defending liberty, we're defending America. When you leave borders wide open, then you abridge the citizens of this country's rights. Borders are wide open, but we have to send people over to another country to die, to stop people across the ocean, but we don't have to worry about the border. Now that doesn't mean I want some big brick wall built down at the border, because we already know with a government like this what that would lead to. No, you can't leave the country. No, you can't take your wealth out of the country. By the way, we're going to confiscate that. That needs to pay our national debt. And since, you quit your job, we'll just put you in this camp where you'll be labor, and you owe because you've been an American citizen and we collected this much debt. You as an American citizen owe money for our debt. It's one of those things where don't think it's a possibility. Go on with your life the way you are. But don't be surprised when it happens. Because we've seen from governments and dictatorships and all these different types of countries that have tried things and have dealt with dictators, and we see what government is capable of doing. Ignore what your government's doing and watch it happen. Because the most evil people that truly seek power over your life are going to gravitate to positions of power if you allow them to exist. And I am a realist. I don't think we're going to become a libertarian society overnight. I understand that we need to scale back to make this a peaceful transition towards liberty. But I don't have, this grand view that, we can get to a, somewhat liberty society and stop. And expect it not to start reversing its course. Through scaling back, we also, in that transition, need to be able to inspire people to show that, humanity is not dead, to take the bonds off people that prevent them from being their own people, regulations, things that cause people to go, well, I know how to do this. I could do it. I could run a successful business, but I don't know all the legal stuff. I don't know all the permits, the paperwork, all the IRS crap, which even, the IRS people don't even know. All the regulation is really what a lot of times hinders people from taking that chance. They have to put so much in jeopardy to be able to take that chance that it might put their family at risk. I think when society starts growing, as individuals start growing, that's when you'll see society really let go of the concept of having some dictatorial organization, so-called representing them to make rules. Something like the non-aggression principle would be a common sense thing. Well, what about, people that aren't mentally there? I think when humanity has grown, we don't have to worry about that. We always see people willing to do, all kinds of things to help a charity out, to help people out. I think there would be more of that if more people could provide for themselves without having first to pay off the government. That kind of extortion that governments like to do. Oh, you wanna produce? Well, pay us, and then you're allowed to produce. That shows a lack of free market in a society. If we're going to grow into a libertarian society, I do think the constitutional route is the way to go. It might not be the only way, but I support scaling back our federal government to bringing more of the responsibility to the local level, because that's the step towards liberty, and that's a peaceful step. I think where on the constitutional side, where diehard libertarians will hit a roadblock with the constitutionalists, is when libertarians go, now we need to scale back more. Now we believe that states really shouldn't be, that states are centralizing the government too much. And you'll have the diehard constitutionalists going, no, that's part of our founding document, paper. Well, I really respect the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence and our Bill of Rights. I think they were revolutionary acts for their time, for the society that introduced those. But I don't think it went far enough. I think we should have evolved enough to be able to look past that. And it's just like looking at our founding fathers. We might look at our founding fathers, they did this wrong, they did that. Well, we also have to address what they did right, because we have to have a respect for people that are attempting to do what is right. Because we have a society now that definitely, on the web, where there's basically hate groups for all kinds of radio hosts and, whether it be Alex Jones, Glenn, but, whoever. They want to just demonize them for anything they got wrong or any mistakes they might have made or, a lot of things. And it's like, if that camera or that microphone was turned on you for 20 years or 10 years or even 5 years, do you think it's not going to catch mistakes? Think it's not going to catch, maybe, a contradiction in what you're saying? We're not perfect. We're all human beings. And that doesn't mean that you ignore the mistakes. I think there's a fundamental thing when people make mistakes that others that see that don't demonize the person for making that mistake, but learn from it and help others learn from it. I think that's a, fundamental thing when you want to create a free society, that we must be that change. And again, that goes back to, be the change you want to see. You must be that change. You must be the person that helps evolutionize a way of thinking. And I think a lot of people are waking up now, fundamentally. And when I say that, there's people waking up that are still really biased. And that's okay, because at least they're starting to be aware of the Matrix. They're starting to see the Matrix. But they still have that natural instinct from when they were in the Matrix. So they're kind of, in that doorway, trying to break out of the Matrix, but the instinct from being in the Matrix so long, it wants to pull them back in. And I've seen people that have recently been really, well, I don't want to say recent, because I've kind of been watching it happen. There's someone I actually had on this broadcast before. With all this divide and conquer racism going on, trying to get racial tensions fired up, I've watched one guy really start falling into the trap. And this is why I fundamentally kind of try not to bring up, a whole bunch of white people beat up a black person and called them the N-word because this was a racist crime, or vice versa. Because that's really defeating what's really happening here. Another group of people beat up on another person, whether it be because of racism, whether it be because of they were on drugs, or, if it was not in some type of defensive way, if it was a true assault, offensive assault on someone, it doesn't matter whether it was because of racism or whether it's because they were walking down the wrong block wearing the wrong colors or they were on drugs. That was the crime. I try not to feed into that. And what I've watched is, I've watched people read so much of it. It might be that whole Facebook experience or experiment that Facebook did, changing people's news feeds. This might have been a result of it. I don't know. But I've seen where people were just nothing but Trayvon Martin, and all the, racism stories, that they fell into the trap. And what is the trap? Well, part of it is they started posting reversal type stories on the racism. Like, oh yeah, this, you always have the black crimes. Here's black people up on a white person calling them cracker. You fell into the trap. And then it does nothing but becomes more extreme. And the same happens on the other side, where black people they get inundated with, people tell them it's about the race. It's always about the race. And they get to a point where, we need our black-only communities. So segregation that you fought against is now what you want. Some of them have been fighting for it the whole time. Those people are trying to manipulate. And the same on both sides. And they're accomplishing their goal. And I hope the listeners out there hearing this are not falling into that trap. Sorry, I had to check my phone, see if I have any updates on my grandma. I'm waiting for some news. So forgive me there. Just double checking. It gets to a point where it really gets kind of saddening to watch people fall for it. Because these are people that really did have a grasp on what's happening to us as a society. I'm going to play something from Alex Jones. I might not play the whole thing, but I think it's a good point and something that should be discussed, because these techniques are being used on people around the world, not just in this country. And it's getting people in countries fighting against other people in other countries that are fighting against those same people. And it's all because they're being told something. It's not because of what they know. And they want this. They want a global revolution towards a more centralized government, while others would like the complete opposite, a global revolution for the individual to be free. And then you have people that might want to call for a revolution in only America for our socialist agenda or our corporatist agenda. But the globalists are running things to the point where they're trying to steer everything that happens in a certain direction to accomplish their goals. I'm going to play this clip before I talk too long. I want to play at least the beginning of it here.
Well, if you just joined us, we have President Obama months ago saying his number one fear is a nuclear weapon going off in Manhattan. Last night, we have Senator Inhofe going on Fox News 25. Videos up on Infowars.com and DrudgeReport.com if you want to see it. The story's posted. And is saying that he's worried about ISIS, which is really Al-Qaeda or IS, blowing up a U.S. city. Only a nuclear weapon, atomic or hydrogen, is going to be doing that. And we now have the reports of ISIS, which is just, again, the new name of Al-Qaeda, because we armed Al-Qaeda. That's who the group is to attack Assad. The military said no to it last year and got upset, so they renamed it IS. And now they want IS to hit us, because then Homeland Security can grandstand and say, see, we need the NSA to spy on you, even though the NSA won't stop the attack. Watch. Just like 9/11, they were spying on everything, didn't stop anything. And just like 9/11, when Saudi Arabia is part of the group that attacked us, and the door was open for them, we will then attack Syria this time, just like we attacked Iraq last time. And just like Homeland Security now, according to, even before Bush left office, but it went into overdrive when Obama got in 7 years ago, that Homeland Security, 90+% of it is spent on the liberty movement, veterans, gun owners, the Tea Party. This whole thing is to suppress the American people, so the criminal political class can rob us 7 ways to Sunday and convert us to a total banana republic. U.S. Army to be used against insurrectionist Tea Party. That is in the Army manuals. Look it up. In Full Spectrum Operations in the Homeland, a vision of the future for the Army War College. And also, there's similar reports in Forbes, AP, you name it. Getting into some of the headlines from Infowars.com. Righteous rage. Ferguson residents fed up with martial law. Corporate media plays dumb on spread of radical Islam. Kurt Nemo. Kiev accuses Russia of invading Ukraine again. Hasn't been true the last 4 times. Ferguson. A preview of America's burgeoning police state. Another special report. TSA letter admits illegals allowed to fly without ID. That's now confirmed, what we broke months ago. Research definitively proves TSA body scanners are useless. They're good to train you to be a slave, though. Government backs down as National Guard leaves Ferguson. U.S. begins selling Syrian intervention using ISIS pretext. And then up in the tiles in the other news area, below the top news area of Infowars.com, we have the Fox 25 video of Senator Inhofe talking about a U.S. city being destroyed. But first, Obama, 3 months ago, saying the main threat is a nuke going off in New York City. Boy, wouldn't Homeland Security love that? They could totally take over society. They're all lined up. They're already doing it, but they want to shut everything down. They've got the radio, TV, EAS takeover systems in. They've got the checkpoints set up, the armored vehicles ready, the FEMA camps activated, the borders imploded, just destabilizing the whole world. This is their plan, Cloward and Piven, Agenda 21. Let's go to that clip.
When it comes to our security, with the prospect of a nuclear weapon going off in Manhattan.
Now, 4 weeks ago, the White House put out a statement saying the world has seen unprecedented tranquility and stability under the global leadership of Barack Hussein Obama, known as our savior, according to Jamie Foxx, not according to me. But last week, Hagel, the Secretary of Defense, came out and said the whole world is, quote, blowing up. And I agree with that. And you know who the Wile E. Coyote is? Planting the bombs, pushing the plungers? Our government, George Soros, the globalist, NATO, is running around giving weapons to every radical group, whether they be Nazis, right-wing nationalists in Ukraine, whether it be jihadis of any stripe. I mean, this is bad. And only public ignorance of geopolitical factors and the players is causing this. I'm going to your calls, but I don't want to hear from men out there anymore and women that you can't figure this out. You say you can figure out all the sitcom people, all the vampire movie people. Guys can figure out all the sports scores, and guys will walk up to each other at the gym or in an elevator, or I'll hear guys at a restaurant arguing for like an hour with stats, throwing them out. Well, this team's got that, and this team's got this, and we've got weapons, and repeating everything from the War Channel, ESPN. where men are arrested in their development all day watching other men, all excited, showing militarized planning about simulated warfare games, little boys playing games, little boys playing fantasy football. And I'm not judging you if you like to go watch a basketball game or football game or baseball game or you like the Olympics. I like watching the sprinters. I like watching a good football game in overtime. But, man, I will not use my brain space on knowing all the factoids. A lot of guys are like, man, you're not very manly. That's right. I like to know about almost every country I can, their basic history, how they interconnect with each other, what group is behind what historically, the old beefs, how the globalists are manipulating that using sociology, anthropology, psychology, archetypal union psychology, full spectrum dominance, the eugenics-based global plan, the technocracy, the breakaway civilization system that's already been developed, how far advanced that breakaway civilization is. It may be more than we know. In fact, it probably is more than we even know, 30 years advanced. These are epic, giant issues. So I'm almost as manly as some guy that can spout off all the football statistics and that'll bug his eyes out at you when you're walking through the store and wants you to get out of his way because he's bigger than you are. See, I'm not trying to act tough and manly. I'm trying to be a man and build a future for my family. I'm trying to navigate all the primitive manipulation and garbage to not be a primitive, to advance to the next level and try to save civilization. I'm not afraid of the big muscle-bound guy. I'm afraid I'll bash his brains out all over the ground. And I don't want to do that. I want him to grow up and be a man and try to save the republic. That's what we're talking about here, ladies and gentlemen. It's not being fake macho idiots, but actually learning the facts, being men, learning how the world really works and saying no to it, learning how they game the economy. By the way, even if you're a cynical mercenary, do you know how much money you can make with the knowledge of how the stock market really works and with the knowledge of how markets really work? I mean, I generally, and people know this is true, can predict markets, you name it, months or years in advance, knowing how the globalists operate. Can you imagine if I just wanted to spend my time making money off those ideas? And I'm not bragging. I'm a regular guy who clicked archetypally to actually becoming informed about geopolitics and history, all because I read history books as a child and learned how the world really worked and found out how exciting and dynamic it was and decided that I didn't want to be a passive nobody who didn't exist and who was just a spectator who was programmed for my entire life. I want to live. I want to control my destiny. I want to be honorable. I want to return chivalry. I want to return exploration and trailblazing and invention. I want space colonies. I want honorable transparency in government. I want to go to the next level. And I know you do as well. You will not go to the next level knowing about the football scores. You will go to the next level learning about the history of Ukraine, learning about the history of the South, learning about the history of New York, learning about quantum mechanics, learning about what makes the globalists tick. Because when you study the globalists, you find out these people are the most wicked, cold, unhuman people you can imagine who have decided to use all this knowledge that can be used to empower humanity to annihilate humanity. Brian in Arizona, then we'll go to...
Okay, I'm going to stop it there, but, the thing about it is, what he's saying is, we don't have people that are... I don't want to say we don't have people that aren't dreaming or aren't wanting to explore, but I think it's people that are doing it virtually and not doing it physically. Something I've seen out of the Huffington Post, I don't have it up in front of me right now, but it's talking about the end of SeaWorld. How SeaWorld's stock falling off, think 45% or something. Attendance is down, and all the backlash from these groups about the whales being in captivity. And, I do understand that, I have a soft spot for animals. I hunt, but I still have a high respect for nature. And, I'm not a sport hunter that just goes out to hunt. If I do it, I want there to be meaning behind of it, and I don't want to do it in a way that affects nature, negatively. I don't want to kill off the population of deer. I don't want to cause that harm. I think there's a role that we play in nature, and it's not going, oh, you can't kill anything, you can't ever trap anything, you can't ever put something in a cage. How dare you do that? Half the time come from the same people that will carry a little teacup poodle or something in a purse. That dog. All those dogs just enjoy that. Yeah, there might be one or two, but there's probably some like, why am I always in this purse? It's hot out. Let me the hell out of this thing. And I was thinking about the whole SeaWorld thing. And, this kind of plays into what Alex was talking about, the exploration, the learning, the education, the, adventure, and, I'm thinking, how many people, because they were able to go see a whale in person, because they were able to see the amazingness right there in front of them, the flesh of a whale that got them inspired into, marine biology and doing this. How much interaction with whales in these type of situations like SeaWorld have we learned about whales that we might have not been able to do in nature? How many of these whales were there because they were saved? Same with dolphins and others. There's parks out there that they get them because they had to be saved, either injured or a lonely, baby dolphin swimming alone, lost its group, mom might have died. How many of these incidences might be a little bit more important to helping nature, to saving nature than, well, we gotta stop this. You can't have a well in a tank. Not saying it's ideal. Not saying it's right. But I'm also not saying it's wrong. I'm saying that, again, live your life the way you see fit. And I'm thinking, that there was a lot of stuff when I was younger that I got to experience hands-on. Not there's so much I've learned now that I'm an adult, that I've learned because of the internet. But as a child, what is the most motivating and inspirational thing that put me on any type of path? And I have to look back to my hands-on, even when it came to history. My hands-on when, I would go to a museum. I knew people through living history events and stuff that I touched historical objects. And that's one thing that, as a young person, that really inspired me. And before then, it wasn't that I didn't know any history, but it wasn't super important. But when you hold something that someone goes, this is 200 years old. And at that time it was before Revolutionary, but it was also in the Revolutionary War. And they're going, this is 200 years old. And you start hearing the stories, and you actually see how they live, and it becomes something different. And I think the youth nowadays, they're really losing out on a lot, because even when they are engaged in something, let's say they do like wildlife and they're engaged on their tablet, they can see videos. They can learn about it. And then they find out there's one in a tank down in Florida. Oh no, let that thing go. Well, how much of what you learned on that tablet was done because they were able to interact with the whales the way that they did? How much is learned from these things? Not saying it's ideal again, but we have to see all sides of all the issues. And maybe there might need to be better standards for these wells, bigger tanks. It's not about, can you fit a well exhibit water park experience in this 3-acre area. No, it's not about that. It's about, are we providing that animal the right environment and conditions that will not harm it? A deer, I'm not going to sit there and go trap a deer and sit there and watch it suffer and go, well, it's going to be meat later, so I'm going to, I might eat it later, so we'll no, you don't let it suffer. I think maybe that's an ethical thing to bring up, but I think there's so much attack on what people don't like, even when it's not really affecting their life. And I think these are things that really, really need to be addressed. And when you look at it, when you're going about life and you're among society, is, how much do we interject ourselves into something that we don't know much about? And even on this broadcast, I'm sure I might interject myself where I don't know enough about it. But I always try to address that. And I think there's others that they intentionally try to make themselves out to be smarter than they are on a subject. And I think that's what allows people to buy into it. Because these people they're not really about ideology or truth or the facts. They're more about being able to draw the attention. And then there's people that can do both. They can draw the attention to the truth and the facts. And the ones that I always urge people to look at are the ones that are never right. They're, let's maybe look at people like Al Sharpton, for example. It's never about the facts. It's never about the truth. But he can draw a crowd and he can anger people up. It doesn't take facts and truth to do that. And I'm not trying to attack him directly, but when you're not doing good for society, you're not making people aware. No, only thing you're doing is fear-mongering over fallacies, then you need to be addressed. Take care. Thank you all for tuning in. Stay tuned here on UCY.TV for all the great broadcasts. Have a good week.
I waste my time.